Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. This video, as you'll know from the title, is another book video, and it's a bit of a follow-up to my last one where I talked about some of the amazing short fiction that I had read since April, which was my last big reading update. So in this video, I want to talk about some of the great novels that I've read since April. And these two videos aren't inclusive of absolutely everything I've read in this couple of months, but they are all works that I really enjoyed, that I thought fit together for the purpose of a video. Again, I'm going to focus on speculative fiction here. And I think, a reader who might be interested in one of the books that I'm mentioning might also be interested in several others. So that's my kind of logic for talking about these particular books together. And I'm going to try to be fairly brief about each one because I do have 9 novels to talk about that are 9 of the novels that I loved that I've read since April. I'm going to list them all below in the order in which I intend to talk about them. And if you've read any of these novels, do let me know in the comments if you're interested in any of them, or if, of course, based on this, if you know of any books that you think I might be interested in. I love adding titles to my to-read list, which already feels infinite, but always good to discover new authors. So the first book I want to talk about is actually the only book that I don't have a physical copy to show you that I read on my Kindle. And so that book is Embassytown by China Miéville. And China Miéville, incidentally, is the only author that I'm going to mention in this video that I've actually read 2 books since April by China Miéville. He's one of my favorites, a recent favorite. I'm working my way through, his works slowly. So I read Embassytown, which is a science fiction novel. It's set on a planet populated by a species of aliens that I'm going to call the Ariakai. You never know how to pronounce these terms when you just see them written. So Ariakai, who we will say have a language that functions and is structured very differently than human language. So in order to communicate with the Ariakai, there are only a few, very much altered and created for the purpose humans that are called ambassadors that can actually communicate with the Ariakai and be kind of a go-betweens for the humans on this planet and the Ariakai. So the novel really is, to me, about the relationship between thinking and how we see the world and language and how we represent the world, or whether language functions in a representative way, and how shifts in language and shifts in thinking mutually inform each other and go together, and how tremendous those kind of changes can be. And there's a lot of kind of complicated politics in the book in terms of the relationships between the humans and this alien species whose planet that they're living on, and the communication between them and the complexity of that. I do love a book about language. You think about stories like Arrival, for example, by Ted Chiang, also a science fiction book about language. And so I really enjoyed Embassytown and would recommend it 100% if you're into science fiction that really makes you think. The second and third book that I'm going to mention next are both books that I was prompted to buy by a hashtag movement, we'll say, or campaign called Blackout Bestseller List, or hashtag Black Publishing Power. And so this is something that I came across on Instagram, and it started with a post from Amistad Books, which I have learned, I'm just reading off of website here, is a publisher of Black and multicultural books since 1967. And so the Twitter post that they shared, and it made its way onto Instagram as well, read, "To demonstrate our power and clout in the publishing industry, Saturday, June 13th to Saturday, June 20th, we encourage you to purchase any 2 books by Black writers. Our goal is to black out bestseller lists with Black voices." And then the tags. So I wanted to take that opportunity to add 2 books to my collection, specifically by Black authors whose works I hadn't yet read. I didn't want to just buy 2 books that I kind of intended to buy anyway. I wanted to, branch out a little bit And so I bought these next two books, and the two books that I chose are both excellent, and I'm going to read more by both of these authors based on them. So the first book of the two that I read was The Intuitionist by Colson Whitehead. And Colson Whitehead, this was his first book, or his first novel. He has since published several other novels, including The Underground Railroad, which I am really interested in reading, and you'll see on here, author of the Pulitzer Prize winning Underground Railroad, as well as another book that he wrote, which I believe is called Nickel Boys, which also won the Pulitzer. So has written a number of books since this one, but this one really interested me when I started reading about the plot, and so I picked it up, and I'm so glad I did. It's not one that I heard of when it came out, but I really, really liked this book. It was published in 1999, which probably explains why I didn't hear about it. I was fairly young in 1999, but I'll just read the first couple of sentences, and give a little bit of a thought. So the back of the book reads, "Two warring factions in the Department of Elevator Inspectors in a bustling metropolis vie for dominance. The empiricists, who go by the book and rigorously check every structural and mechanical detail, and the intuitionists, whose observational methods involve meditation and instinct. Lila Mae Watson, the city's first black female inspector, and a devout intuitionist with the highest accuracy rate in the department, is at the center of the turmoil." So the turmoil kind of starts when an elevator apparently crashes that Lila had inspected. And so, she has to investigate, what's happened here. And there's a lot of this internal politicking amongst the elevator inspectors between the intuitionists and the empiricists. And then there's also the issue of Lila Mae's experiences as the first black woman who is a elevator inspector, and there's only one other black elevator inspector in the book who's a man. And so suffice to say that the book isn't really about elevators. It isn't really about elevator inspection. It is about a lot of other things, in particular about race and racism and challenging racism. So this one I really, really enjoyed. It's a hard book to explain without giving too much away. But if this sounds of any interest to you at all, I would really say to read, maybe the Goodreads or, a bookstore synopsis and see. I thought that this was really, really excellent. And I'm really looking forward to, at some point, picking up a copy of The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead as well, which also looks absolutely fantastic, and which won the Pulitzer. The second of my Blackout bestseller list books that I chose was Everfair by Nisi Shawl. And this novel was also a debut novel, Nisi Shawl's debut novel, who had written and published a number of short stories before. And this book has kind of been on my radar for a while, and I'm not sure why I hadn't read this book before. It was a Nebula Award finalist, a Tiptree Award honor list book, Locus Award for the best first novel finalist. So very much, a book with many, many accolades that are absolutely deserved. And this book is a steampunk historical fiction, and it is set in the context of Belgium's colonial occupation of Congo, and then the kind of years following that. And so the back of the book just says that the book explores the question of what might have come of Belgium's disastrous colonization of the Congo if the native populations had access to advanced technology. In Shaw's eloquently explored vision, told by a multiplicity of historically silenced voices, land purchased from King Leopold II is set aside as an imaginary utopia for native populations of the Congo and former slaves returning from abroad. It will be nearly impossible to keep this land their own, yet the citizens of Everfair are determined. So this book was incredible. It took a little while to get into it first. The way that this book is structured is very, very short chapters, and the point of view that the chapter is from changes each time, and there are quite a lot of points of view. So at first, they're not. It's not quite readily apparent how the different points of view are related, but once you're a couple of chapters in and get to know who the different characters are and what their relations to each other are, it reads beautifully. I loved this. It spans, each chapter tells you the place and date that the chapter is set. There are sometimes quite big chronological jumps of like a year or more in between chapters. So it starts July 1889, and then the last chapter, I never would say to jump ahead, but the last chapter goes to 1919. So quite a while, like 30 years of time span. And it explores so many issues in an interesting way, thinking about, colonialism and resource extraction and the relationships between white utopian settlers wanting to contribute to create this society in Africa with African American folks who are involved in this project, as well as with the folks who are from and who live in the Congo already, as well as with the different pre-existing power structures there. Really, really interesting book for sure. I would love to read more of Nisi Shawl's work based on this novel for sure. And one of the little quote on the front from someone who's reviewing the book says, "Sometimes sad, often luminous, and always original." And I think that sums that book up quite well. So if you would like to read alternative history, steampunk in particular, that this one is a really great read for sure. Next up, one of my more recent reads, and not a serious read at all, far outside of my usual domain of reading, is Redshirts by John Scalzi. Some folks may have heard of this book. This one is not particularly new. It was published in 2012, and anyone who is, like me, a very dedicated fan of Star Trek will probably know what the title Redshirts is getting at. But if you don't, the Redshirts in Star Trek are minor characters who go on away missions from the ship and tend to get killed. So often, in a Star Trek episode, like going all the way back to the original series, you'll see, Captain Kirk and Spock and some main characters go down to a planet that they've never visited, and there'll be one or two minor characters who maybe, you don't even know their names, who jokes are in red shirts, and those are the ones who are going to get killed on the away mission, right? And of course, Kirk and Spock and McCoy are going to get away. So in this book, the Redshirts on a ship called the Intrepid, it's a very, very thinly, if at all, veiled reference to Star Trek. But in this book, essentially the Redshirts figure out what's happening and see that they're not making it back from the away missions. So start trying to avoid the away missions at all costs. And then the book kind of goes in some quite interesting directions that I'm not going to spoil because they're not spoiled on the back. So I'm not going to give them away. But it's about the Redshirts kind of trying to figure out the nature of their plight and how to get out of it, right? So this one, very light. I would say it's definitely one for if you are a Star Trek fan, you will get a kick out of this book. If you're not a Star Trek fan, you probably won't be interested in this book, but it's a fun read for sure. Nice, and a quick read as well. Next up, I read The Kraken, or actually just Kraken, by China Miéville. Again, one of my favorite authors. And I had picked this book for when I was at the cottage for a week. So I sat with my feet in the lake on a half-submerged lawn chair and read Kraken. And so Kraken starts off, the back of the book will tell you, with a giant squid specimen from London's National History Museum being stolen, right? And so it starts following a character called Billy, who's a curator at the Natural History Museum. And, the whole book is, who took the Kraken and why, right? Where is the Kraken? And so it's set in London, but it's set certainly in a mythical, magical London. A London, the back of the book says, awash in secret currents of myth and magic, a weird metropolis where competing cults, cops, and criminals, wizards and assassins are locked in a war with unimaginable consequences. For the magnificent missing sea beast may be more than just a biological rarity. There are those who are sure it's a god that someone is hoping will end the world. So this one is interesting. I think it's a lot of things at once. In some occasions it feels, it's very much comedic. I got lots of laugh out louds about this book as I was reading it. And actually my partner is reading this book now, and every so often, I'll hear a little like, and I'll have to be like, what? Like, what part are you at? What part are you at? So we can talk about it. My partner read Redshirts as well, so we're enjoying reading some of the same books this summer. And so this is a fun book. It's a weird book. There are some great characters in here. There's a character, Wati, who's probably my favorite character in the book. There's a great Star Trek reference moment in the middle of the book. This one had a lot of cultural references and kind of pop culture references, some of which I was a lot more familiar with than others, but the Star Trek reference I quite enjoyed. It's like, I felt like that was just there for me, And so this is a great cottage read, and I so much enjoyed this. It was not what I was expecting at all. It dealt a lot with cults, and so there's a cult of the Kraken who worships the Kraken, and has ideas about its significance, which are very different, of course, than the ideas of the Kraken's significance to, for example, the staff of the Natural History Museum or to kind of scientists in general. And yeah, it's a hard one to describe, but I really, really loved it. I read it fairly quickly considering how long this book is. 500 pages. I probably read it in kind of 4 days on vacation, and I loved it. So that was The Kraken, or just Kraken. There's no the, it's just Kraken. Kraken by Miéville. Excellent. Next up is An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. I can't believe that I didn't update on this book already, which just, shows how long it's been, because this book actually was, you may recall, a book that was on my book stack of shame. But I finished this one in early May. This is a book that I had owned for quite some time, and for whatever reason, it just never was the one that I picked up off of my shelf. I think I've shared a little bit about this book before, but I'll just read. I'll read a quote actually from Tananarive Dew, who is reviewing the book on the back, who writes, imaginative in the vein of Colson, Whitehead, Samuel Delany, and Octavia Butler, this novel explores the struggles of slum dwellers aboard a spacecraft sadly reminiscent of our own world. With outstanding world building and an unforgettable protagonist, this is a notable debut by an author whose work I look forward to reading for years to come. So the protagonist of this book, Aster, lives on a intergenerational spaceship called the HSS Matilda, which has, we learn in the book, left a ruined planet behind and is on its way, to a new place for the people to live. And as the book explains on the back, the space vessel is organized much like the antebellum South. So extremely hierarchical, extremely, institutionally, racistly organized in terms of its society, its culture, its economy, its resource distribution, everything. And so, Aster, it says in the back of the book at the end, embroiled in a grudge with a brutal overseer, Aster learns that there may be a way to improve her lot if she's willing to sow the seeds of civil war. So it's a story of resistance against this totally unjust and oppressive order. This book was a really intense read. I found it quite upsetting at points. Like, there were a couple of really, really difficult points in this book. Of course, like with the subject matter, I expected that. This book is incredibly written. I know that River Solomon has another book, which is out, called The Deep, that I intend to purchase and read as well. And I can't wait for that. I don't know why this book sat on my shelf and why it was in the book stack of shame, because this book was excellent. And I'm glad that I read it, and I would absolutely suggest it for sure. I thought it was really, really great. A difficult read, a very difficult read, but really, really excellent. The next book on the list, by one of my all-time favorite authors, N.K. Jemisin, The City We Became. This one is brand new out. I had pre-ordered this book as soon as I knew that it existed, because I love N.K. Jemisin's work. She has a collection of short stories called How Long Till Black Future Month, and in that book, one of the stories in the short story collection comes to be kind of the basis of or a prelude to this book. And so I will just say, like, this cover is really cool, and something that I had never seen is that on the back, and this book is published by Orbit Books, on the back there's this piece called Bring the Cover to Life, and you just put it on a this Google Lens, and then when I did that and I hovered my phone over it, N.K. Jemisin's face pops up, there's N.K. Jemisin, and talks a little bit about the book. So that was a really fun feature to discover. Anyway, but in this book, the description on the inside, without reading all of it, just the little end piece, reads that every great city has a soul. Some are ancient as myths, and others are as new and destructive as children. New York City, she's got 6. So in this book, it follows essentially avatars for the boroughs of New York City. And, the city is emerging as a city of the world, without explaining kind of the universe too much. So there are these avatars that represent the different boroughs. And I've been to New York City. I haven't spent a ton of time there or anything, but I'm sure that for folks who are even more familiar with New York City, the way that N.K. Jemisin has represented the different boroughs in the personalities of these different avatars will be very much of interest. This book deals with a lot of important political issues, racism, gentrification, important in ways that are really interesting, I thought. To my knowledge, this book is going to be part of a series, and that there will be more City We Became related books. I will probably pre-order them as soon as I can. I really, really enjoyed this. Again, it's one that I couldn't put this down. Once I got into it, it just grabbed me right away. And so, I'm such a Jemisin fan, but The City We Became was excellent. So highly, highly recommend. And now I'm down to the last 2 books. I've made pretty good time, I think. I recently just finished this book, which is called Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. And this is an interesting one. So just the very, very start of the blurb reads, while most of the world has drowned beneath the sudden rising waters of a climate apocalypse, Deneta, formerly the Navajo reservation, has been reborn. The gods and heroes of legend walk the land, but so do monsters. And it goes on to describe Maggie Hosky, who is a monster hunter, Deneta monster hunter, supernaturally gifted killer who goes on a adventure, right? To see this, what's going on with these monsters, right? And this book was quite scary at times for me. I really enjoyed it. I would read more of these, and I'm not sure if there's one out. I should have researched this before I made this video. There may already be a second book, a follow-up to Trail of Lightning out as well. I would like to definitely read more of Maggie's story, and without it's the first book in the 6th World series, it says. And so I would like to read more of this 6th World series, like without giving anything away. The way that this book ended, there's certainly a ton of space to pick up the story again. This one was a bit of a scary read for me. But I really liked Maggie as a protagonist. I thought she was really interesting. I really like how she was developed as a character, and her relationships with some of the other characters developed over the trajectory of the book. So I would really like to definitely read more of Maggie Hosky, presuming that she, in fact, appears in and/or is the protagonist of the next book. I don't know that for sure, but I hope to read more of Maggie Hosky and of Rebecca Roanhorse, 6th World series, Trail of Lightning being the first. And then the last book that I will mention, also this is the last in the other video I made as well. I read Network Effect by Martha Wells, which is the 5th book in the Murderbot series, the first of which is a novel. The other 4 were the novellas, which I mentioned in my last video. And so I love Murderbot. And last night I went to a short story club Q&A with Martha Wells, who's the author. I had a great time. I'm signed up for the emails. I really look forward to future short story clubs. I'll, check out my last video where I show a link to the short story club. And it was just really a facilitated discussion where anybody who wanted to got to ask a question. So that was great. And Jemisin, who I mentioned from one of the previous books, is one of my favorite authors, writes the quote at the top of the book here, and writes, "Martha Wells is the best writer of lovable, snarky, gender-subversive killing machines out there." So the lovable, snarky, gender-subversive killing machine is, in fact, Murderbot. And I've learned that there's another Murderbot coming out, a new novella next April. And I'm going to pre-order and definitely buy Murderbot. This is a great series about the adventures and misadventures of a sentient AI who, is at different points, certainly engaging with and living amongst humans, but has no desire to be one, unlike a lot of other AIs or cyborgs that we see represented in science fiction, right? Trying to perhaps become more human. Murderbot, though Murderbot does have some human biological components, is not interested in being a human. Murderbot wants to watch television most of the time, and finds emotions perplexing and at times yucky. I really enjoy Murderbot so much. It's such an interesting protagonist voice. So if you're looking for a really fun series to read, check out Murderbot. Start with the first novella, All Systems Red. But the novel was great, and I will say, again, without spoilering, because I don't think it is mentioned. No, it's not explicitly mentioned in the book, but I will say that a character who came from one of the previous novellas comes to figure prominently in this novel as well. And I was glad that we got to have a return of that character. And I was very glad to hear in the chat with Martha Wells last night that we're early on in Murderbot's series, and that there will be more Murderbots to come. So I'm at 30 minutes. That's my reads since April in terms of novels in speculative fiction, broadly speaking. If you've stuck with me, thank you so much. Let me know again what you've been reading, or if you've read any of these books and have thoughts about them, please do share. If you know of any novels that you think might strike my fancy, please do mention those, because I love adding to my stack. I don't have it to show you since I'm again reading on my Kindle, but my current read is The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal, which is set in the 1950s, or the book is now set in the 1950s. I'm not sure if it ever, jumps too much ahead of that, but it's the first book in a series called Lady Astronaut, and it's started with a meteor hitting Earth, and humans are scrambling to get things together and figure out the ramifications of that and to respond as needed. So I just started that book last night and I'm enjoying it so far. I'll talk about it in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.